On his 18th birthday, he walked out of the only home he'd ever known with a single cardboard box. He thought he had nothing, but a letter from a dead man would lead him to 700 acres of forgotten land, and a secret buried in a stone well that would force him to choose between a fortune and the truth. If you believe in second chances and the hard road to finding where you belong, make sure you're subscribed, because this is a story about what it means to truly come home. The air on the morning I turned 18 tasted like freedom, which is to say, it tasted like exhaust fumes and indifference. For 10 years, I'd lived inside the beige walls of the St. Jude's Home for Boys. 10 years of waking to the same bell, eating the same lumpy oatmeal, and staring out the same wire mesh windows at a world that didn't seem to have a place for me. And then, just like that, it was over. A signature on a dotted line, a handshake from a man whose name I'd already forgotten, and a cardboard box containing 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of worn-out shirts, a faded photograph of a woman I was told was my mother, and $112 in cash. That was the sum total of my life. I stood on the curb, the city noise a physical blow after years of institutional quiet. Cars hissed by, people flowed around me like a river around a stone, their faces set, their destinations certain. I had no destination. I was a ghost haunting my own first day of life. The box felt heavy in my arms, not from its weight, but from its emptiness. This was it. This was everything. The state had done its duty. I was officially an adult, officially on my own, officially and completely lost. My plan, if you could call it that, was to find the nearest bus station and buy a ticket to anywhere. Someplace where the sky was bigger and the silence was a choice, not a rule. Someplace where I could forget the feeling of being a file in a cabinet, a number on a form. Before I could take my first step into that terrifying new world, a voice called my name. Leo Morgan? I turned. It was Mrs. Gable, the home's administrator, a woman whose expressions ranged from mild disappointment to severe disapproval. She was holding a single thick manila envelope, looking as if it offended her. "This came for you. In the mail," she said, as if the concept were foreign. "Legally, we couldn't give it to you until the moment you were officially discharged. It's from a law firm." She handed it to me, her fingers recoiling as if it were hot. I tucked it under my arm, the stiff paper a strange contrast to the flimsy cardboard of my box. "Good luck, Leo," she said, the words as hollow as the hallway behind her. Then she turned, and the heavy oak door of St. Jude's clicked shut, a sound of absolute finality. I walked for blocks, not knowing where I was going. The envelope, a burning curiosity against my ribs. A law firm? I'd never known anyone who needed a lawyer. My life had been decided by social workers and judges, not attorneys in suits. I found a bench at a small neglected park, wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing place. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. Inside was a letter printed on heavy, cream-colored paper that felt impossibly expensive. The letterhead read, "Abernathy and Sons, Attorneys at Law, Northwood, Vermont." The words swam before my eyes, a language from another planet. "Dear Mr. Morgan," it began, "we represent the estate of your late grandfather, Mr. Silas Morgan. It is our duty to inform you that upon the occasion of your 18th birthday, you are the sole heir to his property and remaining assets." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Grandfather? I had no grandfather. I had no one. The file at St. Jude's was thin. It said, "Mother, deceased. Father, unknown. No known living relatives." It was a story I had worn like a skin, the story of my own non-existence. I read on, my breath catching in my throat. The letter detailed the inheritance. It wasn't a few $100s or an old watch. It was a property, a farm. It listed the parcel number, the deed reference, and then the size, 700 acres. I read the number 3 times, convinced my eyes were playing tricks on me. 700 acres of land, a farmhouse, 2 barns, and a small, solvent bank account to cover the property taxes for the next 5 years. It was a fortune. It was a mistake. It had to be for someone else, another Leo Morgan, a boy who had a family, a history, a grandfather who had thought of him. But the letter was clear. It named my mother. It named St. Jude's. It was for me. There was a condition, of course. There's always a condition. I couldn't claim it by mail. I couldn't send a proxy. I had to appear in person at their office in Northwood, Vermont, within 30 days to sign the papers. The letter concluded with a sterile, "We look forward to meeting with you at your earliest convenience." At the bottom, a handwritten note was scrawled in faint, spidery ink, almost an afterthought. It looked different from the typed formality of the rest of the page. It said, "Your grandfather was a good man, son. He never forgot you." I stared at the paper, the world around me fading to a dull hum. The exhaust fumes, the distant sirens, the shouting from a nearby apartment. It all disappeared. There was only the rustle of this impossible letter in my hands. 700 acres, a grandfather, a place, for a boy who had never owned more than what he could carry in a single box. The idea of owning a piece of the earth itself was so vast, so staggeringly immense, it felt like a dream I was about to wake up from. But the paper was real. The ink was real. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it carefully inside my box, on top of my few meager possessions. My plan had changed. I knew where I was going now. I was going to Northwood, Vermont. I was going to find out if I was the kind of person who could have a home. The bus ride to Vermont was a journey through a life I'd never lived. The gray concrete of the city bled into sprawling suburbs, then into the patchwork greens and browns of the countryside. I watched towns roll by, each one with a main street, a post office, a cluster of houses with lights in the windows. People lived in those houses. They had families. They had histories that stretched back further than a decade in a state-run facility. For the first time, I felt a pang of something that wasn't just emptiness. It was a strange, painful kind of yearning. The lawyer's letter sat in my pocket, a warm, heavy weight. I'd read it so many times the creases were soft as cloth. Northwood wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a general store, a gas station, a diner, and a small, white-steepled church. The bus hissed to a stop and left me in a cloud of diesel smoke, the only person who'd gotten off. The air was different here. It smelled of pine and damp earth and wood smoke, clean and sharp. It felt like I'd stepped off the edge of the world I knew. The law office of Abernathy and Sons was right on the main square. A modest brick building with a heavy, dark green door. The name was painted in flaking gold leaf on the glass. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like the first real one of my adult life, I pushed the door open. A small bell tinkled. The office was quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. A woman with kind eyes and hair the color of snow looked up from a massive wooden desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle. I'm Leo Morgan," I managed to say. "I have an appointment with Mr. Abernathy." Her expression softened instantly. "Of course, Leo. We've been expecting you. He's right through there." She gestured to an inner office. Mr. Abernathy was an old man, older than I'd expected, with a face like a road map of his life. He wore a tweed jacket that looked as old and comfortable as he did. He stood up from behind a desk cluttered with stacks of books and files and extended a dry, warm hand. "Mr. Morgan, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm David Abernathy. Your grandfather was a client of mine for nearly 40 years." His office was lined with books from floor to ceiling. A window looked out onto a small, neat garden. It was the calmest room I'd ever been in. He gestured for me to sit. "Please," he said. "We have much to discuss." He spoke for nearly an hour. He laid out the legal documents, the deed, the property survey, the bank statements. It was all real, every impossible word of it. He explained that my grandfather, Silas, had passed away 2 years ago. He'd set up the will and the trust with these specific instructions, that I was not to be contacted until my 18th birthday. He wanted you to be a man, free and clear of the state before you had to face this, Mr. Abernathy explained, his voice patient. He felt it was the only way to ensure you had a true choice in the matter. A choice about what, I wondered. It seemed like the only choice was between nothing and everything. Then he pushed another folder across the desk. This one was thinner, more modern. "Now, there is another matter," he said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more businesslike. "For the past year, I have been fielding offers on the property. A corporation, Horizon Development, is very interested in the land. They want to build a luxury golf resort and residential community." He opened the folder. Inside was a letter of intent. The number printed at the bottom made me feel dizzy. It was millions. More money than I could possibly comprehend. "Their latest offer is substantial, as you can see. It would set you up for life, Mr. Morgan. You would never have to worry about a single thing." He let the silence hang in the air. I looked from the life-altering number on the page to the old lawyer's steady, unreadable gaze. "Why are they so interested?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a large, undeveloped parcel of land with river frontage and mountain views," he said. "It's prime real estate. But more than that, your grandfather's property is the key. It's surrounded on 3 sides by national forest, and on the 4th by land they already own. Without your 700 acres, their project is impossible. They cannot get the road access or the footprint they need." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "Silas refused to sell to them for years. He was protective of that land. He told them it wasn't for sale at any price." I felt a strange, fierce loyalty to this man I'd never met. This grandfather who had apparently fought for this place. A place I'd never even seen. "So, what's my choice?" I asked. "Your choice is this," Mr. Abernathy said, his eyes holding mine. "You can sign their offer right now. I can have the funds transferred to an account for you by the end of the week. You can walk away a very wealthy young man and never look back. Or you can go out to the property. You can see it for yourself before you decide. Your grandfather left you the keys." He slid a heavy, old-fashioned iron key across the polished wood of the desk. It was ornate, rusted, and felt like it weighed a pound. "The decision is yours, Leo, and yours alone." I stared at the key. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a question. It was the dividing line between the boy who had walked out of St. Jude's with nothing and the man who was being offered everything. The money was a ghost, a number on a page. But the land was real. The farmhouse was real. My grandfather had been real. I reached out and closed my hand around the key. Its cold weight was grounding. "I want to see it," I said, my voice clearer, stronger than it had been all day. "I want to go there." Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I thought you might," he said. Silas would be pleased. He always said the land had to be felt to be understood. The drive out to the property was another transition, from the quiet order of the town to something wilder. Mr. Abernathy had arranged for a man named Hank, who ran the local garage, to drive me. Hank was a man of few words, which suited me just fine. He navigated his dusty pickup truck down the paved road, then onto a gravel one, and finally onto a narrow dirt track that seemed to disappear into the woods. Roads not maintained much past this point. Hank grunted. Your granddad, he liked his privacy. The truck bounced and jostled over ruts and rocks. Trees pressed in on either side, their branches forming a canopy overhead, dappling the path in shifting light and shadow. It felt like we were driving back in time. After another mile, the trees opened up, and Hank pulled the truck to a stop. This is it, he said. End of the line. We were in front of a rusted metal gate slung between two massive stone pillars. A thick chain was wrapped around it, secured with a heavy padlock. I got out of the truck, the iron key from Mr. Abernathy's office feeling heavy in my pocket. This was a different key. Hank handed me a smaller, newer brass one. Lawyer said this'd open it. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking slightly. It clicked open, and the chain fell away. With a groan of protest from the hinges, I swung the heavy gate open. I was standing on the threshold of my own land. The thought was so foreign, so overwhelming, I just stood there for a moment, trying to breathe. Hank drove the truck through, and I secured the gate behind us. The driveway was more of a suggestion than a road. Two faint tracks nearly swallowed by overgrown grass and wildflowers. It wound its way through a sprawling meadow, golden in the late afternoon sun. In the distance, I could see the dark, hazy shapes of mountains rising up to meet a vast, pale blue sky. I'd never seen a sky so big. At St. Jude's, the sky was just a small square you could see if you craned your neck. Here, it was everything. It was an ocean of air, and then I saw it. The house. It was set on a small rise, overlooking the meadow. It was a classic two-story New England farmhouse with white paint that had peeled and weathered to a soft gray, and dark green shutters, one of which hung at a crooked angle. A wide porch wrapped around the front. To the side, there were two large barns. Their red paint faded to the color of dried blood. The whole place looked asleep. Not abandoned, not ruined, but waiting. As Hank pulled the truck to a stop in the tall grass in front of the house, a profound and unshakable feeling washed over me. It was a feeling I had never experienced in my entire life. The feeling of arrival. Hank helped me pull my box from the truck bed. "Got a cell?" he asked. I shook my head. "Didn't think so. Well, I'll be back day after tomorrow to check on you. Bring some supplies. If you need anything before then, well, it's a long walk back to town." He looked at the house, then at me. "Your granddad was a good man. Kept to himself, but he was solid. This place meant the world to him." He gave me a short nod, climbed back into his truck, and with a rumble of the engine, drove back down the long driveway, leaving me alone in the immense humming silence. The silence was the first thing that truly hit me. It wasn't the dead quiet of a locked room. It was alive. It was filled with the whisper of wind through the tall grass, the distant caw of a crow, the buzz of insects. I stood there for a long time, just listening, my box at my feet. The air smelled of sun-baked earth and sweet clover. I walked up the stone steps to the porch. They were solid under my feet. The key Mr. Abernathy had given me, the heavy, ornate iron one, slid into the lock on the front door. It turned with a satisfying, deep-throated clunk. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and time. A long hallway stretched before me, with a staircase rising to the second floor. To my left was a living room, to my right what looked like a dining room. Sunlight streamed through the dirty windows, illuminating billions of dancing dust motes. The furniture was still there, draped in white cloths like sleeping giants. It was a house that hadn't been lived in for 2 years, but it didn't feel empty. It felt paused. I walked into the living room and pulled a sheet off a large, comfortable-looking armchair. I sat down, the old springs creaking in protest. I put my cardboard box on the floor beside me. For the first time, I wasn't a ward of the state. I wasn't a transient. I was sitting in my own chair, in my own house, on my own land. And I started to cry. Not for the sadness of the past 10 years, but for the shocking, terrifying, beautiful possibility of a future. For the next 2 days, I explored. I walked the boundaries of my property, a map from Mr. Abernathy's office in my hand. I followed a creek that wound its way through a dense forest of pine and birch. I climbed a hill and looked out over my 700 acres, a kingdom of green and gold rolling toward the distant mountains. It was more than land. It was a world. I explored the barns, vast, cathedral-like spaces filled with the smell of old hay and rust. I found old tools, a dilapidated tractor, and in the loft of the main barn, a stack of canvases, painted with stunning landscapes of the very views I was now seeing. My grandfather had been an artist, another piece of a puzzle I was only just beginning to assemble. But it was the house that held the real secrets. I methodically went through it, room by room. It was a simple, sturdy home, a large kitchen with an old cast-iron stove, a dining room with a table big enough for a whole family. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. One was clearly my grandfather's. The bed was neatly made. A pair of worn leather boots stood by the door. On the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses rested on an open book. It was as if he'd just stepped out for a walk. The other 2 bedrooms were empty, clean, and waiting. In one, I found a small, hand-carved wooden bird on the windowsill. I wondered if it had been meant for me. The last room on the ground floor was a study. It was lined with books, just like Mr. Abernathy's office. A large, heavy oak desk sat in the center of the room, facing the window. It was the only piece of furniture not covered by a sheet. It felt like the heart of the house. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn wood. I sat in the leather chair behind it. It felt right. I tried the drawers. All of them were unlocked, filled with pens, paper, and other mundane office supplies, all except one. The bottom drawer on the right side was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. There was no key in the desk, no key hanging on the wall. A locked drawer, a small thing, but it felt important. It was a secret waiting to be told. I searched the whole house for a key. I looked in cups, under rugs, on top of door frames. Nothing. I was beginning to think I'd have to break it open when I remembered the small, carved bird in the upstairs bedroom. On a whim, I went back and picked it up. It was light, beautifully detailed. And as I turned it over in my hands, I felt something shift inside. A tiny piece of the base twisted. It wasn't one solid piece of wood. It was a box. I carefully opened it. Tucked inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, was a small, delicate brass key. My heart quickened. I took the key back down to the study, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I knelt by the desk. The key slid perfectly into the lock of the bottom drawer. I turned it, and with a soft click, the drawer opened. Inside, there was no will, no bank book, no hidden treasure. There was only a single, thick envelope, just like the one I'd received from the lawyer. But this one wasn't addressed in typed, formal letters. It was addressed to me, to Leo, in the same spidery, elegant handwriting I'd seen on the note at the bottom of the lawyer's letter. It was from my grandfather. I lifted it out. It felt heavy with unspoken words. My hands were trembling again. I sat in the big leather chair, the afternoon sun slanting across the dusty room, and I opened the letter. "My dearest Leo," it began. The words blurred for a moment. No one had ever called me that, not in that way. "If you are reading this, then you are a man, and you have come home. I pray you can find it in your heart to forgive an old man for the choices he made. I know you must have grown up thinking you were abandoned, that you were alone. Nothing could be further from the truth. You were never abandoned, my boy. You were protected." The letter went on to tell a story that unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself. My mother, his daughter, had been bright and beautiful, but she'd fallen in with a bad crowd in the city. She'd gotten involved with a man who was dangerous, deep in a world of crime and debt. When I was born, that danger clung to us. They were threatening her, threatening me. One night, she showed up on his doorstep, bruised and terrified, with me in her arms. She told him she had to disappear, that it was the only way to keep me safe. She made him promise to protect me. She left that night, and he never saw her again. The letter didn't say what happened to her, only that he'd heard she passed away a few years later. He was left with a grandson, a world of danger swirling around them, and a promise to keep. The people she was running from were looking for her and for me. They knew about him, her only family. He knew they would come to the farm eventually, so he made the hardest decision of his life. To protect me, he had to make me disappear. He took me to the city, to a different state, and left me at a place where he knew I'd be cared for, but where no one could trace me back to him. He created the story of the orphan with no family, and then he returned to his farm to live as a recluse, watching, waiting, making sure the danger had passed. He'd kept tabs on me from a distance through a private investigator, just enough to know I was safe. "Every day for 10 years, I have lived with the ghost of that choice," he wrote. "It was a choice between your life and my heart, and I chose you. I hope one day you'll understand. This land, this house, it's not a payment, Leo. It's an apology. It's your history. It's the roots I was forced to cut." I let the letter fall into my lap. The room was spinning. The story I had told myself my whole life, the story of being unwanted, a piece of driftwood on the ocean of the world, was a lie. It wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of sacrifice. A story of love so fierce it had chosen to break its own heart to keep me safe. I wasn't driftwood. I was an anchor, deliberately hidden on the seafloor to weather a storm. I looked around the dusty study, at the books, at the paintings in the barn, at the light falling on the worn wooden floor. This wasn't just a property anymore. It was a legacy, a painful, complicated, beautiful legacy. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "This is your history. It's the roots I was forced to cut." A single tear traced a path through the dust on my cheek. I wasn't crying from sadness anymore. I was crying for the grandfather I never got to meet, for the mother I never knew, for the years we had all lost. At the end of the letter there was a final instruction. "There is more you need to know about this land and the weight it carries. In this room where I spent so many nights thinking of you, there is a loose floorboard beneath the rug. What you find there is the second half of the story. Be careful, Leo. Some truths are heavier than stone." The weight of that letter settled over me, a physical presence in the quiet house. My entire life had been a question mark, a blank space, and in the span of an hour, my grandfather's words had filled it in with a story of desperation and love. It was a lot to hold. The anger I thought I would feel, the resentment for the years I spent in the system, simply wasn't there. It had been replaced by a profound, aching grief for a man who had clearly loved me more than anything. I sat there for a long time, just breathing in the dusty air of his study, letting the truth of his words settle into my bones. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a presence, a voice in the silence. Finally, I stood up and moved to the center of the room. A large, worn Persian rug covered most of the floor. It was heavy, and it took all my strength to roll it back, revealing the dark, wide planks of the original wood floor. I ran my hands over the boards, searching for any sign of looseness. Near the desk, I found it. One of the boards had the slightest give to it. I wedged my fingers into the crack and pulled. It came up with a soft groan of old wood. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space. And in that space sat a small, gray metal box, the kind people use for cash or important documents. It was closed with a simple latch, not a lock. My hand hesitated over the box. What other truths could be waiting for me in this house? What more could this man, this stranger who was my blood, have to tell me? It's a strange thing to have your world rebuilt and threatened with demolition in the same day. Listen, if you've ever felt completely lost, like the whole world was a language you didn't speak, you know what I was feeling right then. We build these walls around ourselves just to survive. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of the emptiness. The story of being abandoned was my wall. It was a sad story, but it was simple, and it was mine. Now, everything was complicated. I wasn't just an orphan anymore, I was a secret. I was a promise, and I was standing on the precipice of another revelation. Okay, let's get back to that box. I took a deep breath and lifted it out of the floor. It was heavier than it looked. I carried it to the desk and set it down in a patch of sunlight. I undid the latch. The lid creaked open. The first thing I saw was a stack of old photographs, held together with a faded rubber band. I lifted them out. The top photo was of a young woman with a wild, beautiful smile and eyes that were startlingly familiar. She was holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. My mother. And me. I'd only ever seen that one faded, wallet-sized photo from my file. This was her, alive, vibrant. I slowly went through the rest. Pictures of her as a little girl on this very farm. Pictures of my grandfather, a strong, handsome man with a kind face, his arm around her. There were pictures of the house in its prime, the barns freshly painted, the fields neat and tidy. It was a life, a happy life. The life I was supposed to have had. Beneath the photos was a thick bundle of cash, $100 bills, held together with a simple paper band. I counted it, $10,000. A note was tucked inside. For your start, it read in my grandfather's hand. To fix the roof, buy a truck, whatever you need. Don't let pride get in your way. A man needs tools to build a life. It was a practical gift, a thoughtful gift, from a man who knew what it took to make a home. But there was one more thing in the box. At the very bottom lay another envelope, much thicker and heavier than the first. It was sealed with wax stamped with a simple, swirling M. It had my name on it, the second half of the story. I picked it up, the wax seal cool against my fingertips. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was in this letter would change everything. Again. It would be the thing that forced the choice Mr. Abernathy had spoken of. Wealth or something else. I broke the seal. The second letter was different. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was darker, heavier. It was a confession. Leo, it began. I told you the truth about your mother, and why I had to hide you. Now I have to tell you the truth about this land, and it is not a happy story. I need you to know what you are inheriting, the good and the bad. Because this land carries a debt, and I am leaving it to you to decide if it should be paid. He went on to explain that he hadn't been born on this farm. He had bought it 50 years ago. He'd been a young man with a dream of being a painter, of living a simple life close to nature. He'd saved every penny he earned working in a mill. When this farm came up for sale, it was his dream come true. But the price was low, almost too low. The family who owned it, the Caldwells, had owned it for generations. They were selling because they'd been hit by a series of disasters: a fire in their main barn, a blight that destroyed their crops, and finally, a medical emergency that required a huge sum of money they didn't have. They were forced to sell their heritage for a fraction of its worth. My grandfather bought it, feeling a mix of guilt and gratitude. He lived here for years, raised my mother here, painted his landscapes. He was happy. But something always bothered him about the Caldwell's story. The series of disasters had been too neat, too convenient. Decades later, a man on his deathbed, a former foreman for a big timber company in the region, confessed something to my grandfather. The timber company had wanted the Caldwell's land for years, but they'd refused to sell. So the company, run by a ruthless man named Marcus Thorne, had manufactured their ruin. The fire wasn't an accident. The crop blight wasn't natural. They had systematically destroyed the Caldwell family's ability to survive, forcing them to sell to the first person who came along, a young, naive painter named Silas Morgan. My grandfather was devastated. The home he had built, the paradise where he'd raised his daughter, was built on a foundation of lies and cruelty. He had, unknowingly, been a pawn in a rich man's game, and the letter didn't stop there. Marcus Thorne, the man who had destroyed the Caldwells, was the founder of the very same company that was now trying to buy the land from me, Horizon Development. They had waited 50 years, and now they were coming back to finish what they started. "They don't just want the land, Leo," my grandfather wrote. "They want to erase it. They want to bury their crime under a golf course and a row of mansions. Selling to them would be letting them win, letting them wash the blood off their hands with my money, and now, yours." The weight of his words felt like a physical blow. The millions of dollars Horizon Development was offering wasn't just a generous price for a piece of real estate. It was hush money. It was the final nail in the coffin of the Caldwell family's legacy. My grandfather had tried to find the Caldwells, to make amends, but they had scattered to the winds, broken and poor. He never found them. He had lived with this guilt for the rest of his life, a shadow over his peaceful existence. The letter ended with a final, chilling instruction. I could never prove it. Thorne's foreman died before he could sign an affidavit. It was just my word against a powerful company, but I found something. While repairing the old well by the main barn, I found a hidden compartment in the stone lining. The old man, Caldwell, must have hidden it there. It was his last desperate act. I believe the proof is in that well. Leo. The original deeds. Perhaps records he kept. Something to prove the fraud. I was too old and too tired to fight them anymore. But you are young and strong. What you do with this knowledge will define you, son. The truth is in the well. But be warned, it's a heavier stone than the one that covers it. I dropped the letter onto the desk. The silence of the house was deafening. The choice was no longer between money and a piece of land. It was between a fortune built on a lie and a truth that would likely cost me everything. If I exposed Horizon Development, the legal battle would be immense. I would be a penniless 18-year-old against a multi-million-dollar corporation. They would tie me up in court for years. The value of the land would be caught in the legal limbo, worthless to me. If I found proof, the land might not even be legally mine. It might revert to the descendants of the Caldwells, if they could even be found. Selling was the easy path, the smart path. I could take the money, disappear, and start a new life. Free from all of this history, this guilt, this weight. It was everything I thought I wanted just 2 days ago. But I wasn't the same person I was 2 days ago. I was Silas Morgan's grandson. I was the keeper of his home, his secrets, and his regrets. I looked out the window of the study. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the meadow. In the distance, near the dark shape of the main barn, I could just make out the silhouette of the old stone well. It stood there, squat and solid, a silent witness. My grandfather had left me more than just land. He had left me a choice between the man I could be and the man he was afraid he had been. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to the well. I left the house as dusk was settling, the sky a deep, bruised purple. The air was cool on my skin. I carried an old oil lamp from the mantelpiece, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows around me. My footsteps were loud in the quiet evening. The old well was about 100 yards from the house, a circle of gray, moss-covered stones rising about 3 feet from the ground. It was covered with a massive, single piece of slate, as thick as my hand. It looked like it hadn't been moved in a very long time. My grandfather's words echoed in my head, a heavier stone than the one that covers it. He wasn't wrong. I put the lamp down and tried to get my fingers under the edge of the slate. It wouldn't budge. It was sealed to the stone with time and gravity. I went to the barn and found a long, heavy iron pry bar. Using it as a lever, I put all of my weight into it, grunting with the effort. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a scraping, grinding sound that seemed to tear the silence of the evening, the slate shifted. Inch by inch, I managed to slide it back until a dark, circular opening was revealed. A wave of cold, damp air rose from the well, smelling of wet stone and deep earth. I held the lamp over the opening and peered down. The shaft was lined with stone, disappearing into blackness. I couldn't see the bottom. My heart was pounding. Was I really doing this? Was I about to trade millions of dollars for a ghost story for a dead man's guilt? I thought of the boy on the bus, the boy who would have taken the money without a second thought. I wasn't that boy anymore. That boy had no history. I did. I had a grandfather who had loved me, and a wrong that needed to be righted. I went back to the barn and found a long, thick rope and a metal bucket. I tied the rope securely to the bucket's handle, and the other end to the solid timber frame of the well housing. I took a flashlight from the small toolkit Hank had left me, clicked it on, and placed it inside the bucket, pointing down. Then, I slowly, carefully began to lower it into the darkness. The rope spooled through my hands, meter after meter. 10 meters, 20, 30. I could see the beam of the flashlight illuminating the rough stone walls as it descended. Then, with a hollow splash, it hit water. I let out a little more rope, then began to slowly pull it back up, swinging the bucket gently, hoping to see what my grandfather had described. I raised it and lowered it several times, scanning the walls with the moving beam of light. And then I saw it. About halfway down, on the north side of the shaft, one of the stones was different. It was lighter in color and seemed to be set back slightly from the others. A hidden compartment. My breath caught. It was real. Now came the hard part. There was no way I could reach it from here. I needed to go down there. The thought terrified me. I was alone, miles from anywhere. If I fell, if the rope broke, no one would find me for days. But the image of my grandfather's face from the photographs, the weight of his letters pushed me forward. I tested the rope, pulling on it with my full weight. It was old, but it felt strong. The timber frame was solid. I could do this. I tied the pry bar across the top of the well opening and looped the rope through it to give me more control. I took a deep breath, gripped the rope, and swung my legs over the edge. For a terrifying moment, I dangled over the blackness. Then, hand over hand, I began to lower myself into the earth. The air grew cold and damp immediately. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the scuff of my boots against the stone. The circle of twilight sky above me grew smaller and smaller. It was like being swallowed. I focused on the stones in front of me, on the feel of the rope in my hands. I descended slowly, carefully, until my feet were level with the strange stone. I braced myself against the opposite wall, my legs shaking from the strain. The stone had a small indentation on one side, just big enough for a handhold. I pulled. It was stuck fast. I pulled again, gritting my teeth. With a low, scraping sound, it moved, sliding inward to reveal a dark, rectangular cavity. Inside the cavity was a package, wrapped in what looked like oilskin and tied securely with twine. It was exactly where he said it would be. My fingers trembled as I reached in and pulled it out. It was heavy, solid. I tucked it into the front of my jacket, my heart hammering with a mixture of terror and triumph. I had it. I had the truth. Just as I was about to start my ascent, I heard a sound from above. A sound that didn't belong here. The crunch of tires on the gravel of my driveway. Headlights swept across the clearing, illuminating the barn and the house. A car door slammed. "Hello?" a voice called out. A man's voice, smooth and confident. "Mr. Morgan, I'm from Horizon Development. I was told I might find you out here. We have a new offer for you. One I don't think you'll be able to refuse." My blood ran cold. They had found me, dangling in the dark, halfway down a well, with the evidence that could destroy them tucked inside my coat. I was trapped. The man from Horizon Development, a silhouette against the car's headlights, walked closer to the well. "Mr. Morgan, are you there?" I held my breath, praying he wouldn't look down. The package in my jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This was the moment of decision. Not in a lawyer's office, not in a quiet study, but here, in the cold, dark earth, with my legacy in my hands and my future standing just a few feet away. My mind raced. I was hanging by a rope in the dark. He was up there, in the light. He held all the power. I could stay silent, wait for him to leave. But he knew I was here. He would find me eventually. Or I could answer. I could climb out of this hole and face him. I thought about the $10,000 my grandfather had left me. "A man needs tools to build a life," he'd written. The pry bar, the rope, they were tools. But the truth I held in my jacket, that was a tool too, a much more powerful one. "I'm down here," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the stone shaft. "Give me a minute." There was a pause from above. "Down there?" the voice said, a note of disbelief creeping in. "What on earth are you doing in the well?" I didn't answer. I just focused on climbing. Hand over hand, my muscles screaming in protest, I pulled myself up. The world above got larger, the night sky reappearing. Finally, my hands gripped the edge, and I hauled myself out, collapsing onto the damp ground, panting, my clothes soaked and muddy. A man in an expensive suit stood there, staring at me, his polished shoes just inches from the mud. He was holding a sleek leather briefcase. His face was a mask of polite confusion, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Mr. Morgan," he said, extending a hand, which I ignored. "I'm Daniel Shaw. I'm the head of acquisitions for Horizon. I apologize for the intrusion, but our new offer is time-sensitive." He looked at my disheveled state, at the open well, a flicker of something, annoyance, concern, in his eyes. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, getting to my feet. The oilskin package was a hard lump against my ribs. "You said you have a new offer." "Yes," he said. his professional smile snapping back into place. He opened his briefcase. My superiors were very keen to close this deal quickly. We are prepared to offer you $5 million, tax-free. The papers are all right here. You sign, and the money is in your account within 24 hours. He laid a document on the slate cover of the well. The number was staggering. It was a king's ransom. It was the easy way out, laid out right in front of me. All I had to do was forget about the package in my jacket, forget about the Caldwells, forget my grandfather's final wish. I looked from his expectant face to the dark, silent house my grandfather had loved. I thought of the paintings in the barn, the worn boots by his bed. I thought of his confession, the guilt he had carried for 50 years. He had given me more than land. He had given me a chance to be a better man than he felt he had been. He had given me a choice. "The land's not for sale," I said. Shaw's smile faltered. "I don't think you understand, son. This is a life-changing amount of money. For a kid like you, coming from your background, this is a winning lottery ticket. You can go anywhere, do anything." His tone was condescending, a thinly veiled reminder of where I came from, that I was nothing, that I should be grateful, and in that moment my resolve hardened into steel. "I know exactly where I come from," I said, my voice low and steady. "I come from here, and this land is not for sale. Not to you, not to Horizon, not for any price." I pulled the oilskin package from my jacket and placed it on the slate cover next to his contract. "I think you and I have something else to talk about. Something about a family named Caldwell." The color drained from Daniel Shaw's face. His professional veneer cracked, revealing the predator beneath. He stared at the package, then at me, his eyes narrowed. For a long, tense moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the chirping of crickets in the tall grass. He knew. I didn't have to say another word. He knew what I had found. He slowly closed his briefcase. "You're making a very big mistake, kid," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, all pretense of friendliness gone. It was a threat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He turned without another word, got back in his car, and sped down the driveway, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I stood there for a long time, the cool night air on my face, the heavy package in my hands. I wasn't scared. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. Not because of the money I had just turned down, but because of the choice I had just made. The next day, Hank arrived as promised, his truck loaded with groceries. He found me in the kitchen, carefully unwrapping the oilskin package on the old wooden table. Inside was a leather-bound ledger and a set of official-looking documents. It was everything my grandfather had hoped for. The original deed, in the Caldwell family name. Detailed records kept by the old man, documenting the threats, the sabotage, and a signed, witnessed letter detailing the pressure he was under from Marcus Thorne's company. It was the proof. It was the truth. I showed it all to Hank. He was a quiet man, but as he read, his face grew dark with anger. "I remember the Caldwells," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Good people. What happened to them was a crime. The whole town knew it, but no one could prove it. Thorne owned everyone." He looked at me, his expression one of grudging respect. "Your granddad would be proud of you, kid, but you've kicked a hornet's nest. Horizon won't let this go." He was right. The next morning, I took the ledger and the documents to Mr. Abernathy. The old lawyer read through them in silence, his face growing grimmer with each page. When he was done, he took off his glasses and polished them slowly. "Silas always suspected," he said softly. "He carried that guilt with him to his grave. This," he tapped the ledger, "this changes everything. He explained the legal realities. It would be a long, brutal fight. Horizon would throw an army of lawyers at us. They would try to bury us in motions and delays. It could take years, and the outcome was far from certain. "But it's the right thing to do," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "And I will represent you, Leo. For Silas, we will see this through." The legal battle was everything Mr. Abernathy predicted, and more. Horizon Development fought us at every turn. They tried to claim the documents were forgeries. They tried to paint me as an opportunistic teenager trying to extort them. They sent private investigators to dig up dirt on me, on my grandfather. But they found nothing. We had the truth, and we had the proof. Mr. Abernathy, it turned out, was a bulldog in the courtroom. He was old, but he was brilliant and relentless. We also had another unexpected ally. The story got out. A local reporter picked it up, and soon it was a statewide story, the orphan who turned down millions to expose a corporate crime. People rallied to our side. The most important breakthrough came when Mr. Abernathy's investigator, using the information in the ledger, finally located the descendants of the Caldwell family. There were 3 grandchildren, living scattered across the country, none of them well off. They had grown up hearing stories of the beautiful farm their family had lost. When we contacted them, they were shocked, then overjoyed. They flew to Northwood. I met them in Mr. Abernathy's office. 3 strangers, their faces etched with a history that was now intertwined with mine. We weren't adversaries. We were allies. With their testimony, our case became undeniable. Faced with a public relations nightmare and overwhelming evidence, Horizon Development finally folded. They didn't admit guilt, of course. They settled. They paid a massive sum to the Caldwell family, restitution for the crime committed half a century ago, and they dropped all claims to my grandfather's land. Legally, the farm was still mine. The title had transferred to Silas legally, even if it was under fraudulent circumstances. But I knew what I had to do. It was never about owning it. It was about honoring it. I sat down with the Caldwells and Mr. Abernathy, and we drew up a new plan. We formed a trust. The 700 acres would be placed into it, co-owned by me and the 3 Caldwell descendants. We agreed that the land would never be developed. Most of it would be preserved as a nature conservancy, a permanent wilderness. A small portion, where the house and barns stood, would be used as a working farm and an artist's retreat, in honor of my grandfather and the heritage of the land. The story doesn't end with me becoming a millionaire. It ends with something better. It's been a year now. I live in the farmhouse. I spent the $10,000 my grandfather left me fixing the roof and buying a used pickup truck. I'm learning how to farm from one of the Caldwells, a man named Ben who decided to move back and work the land his grandfather had lost. The house isn't quiet anymore. It's filled with the sounds of work, of planning, of life. I spend my evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and I feel a sense of peace I never knew was possible. I'm not an orphan. I'm not a ward of the state. I'm a steward of a legacy. In the end, inheritance isn't about what you're given. It's not about the money or the land or the house. It's about the choices you make with what you're given. My grandfather left me 700 acres, but the real inheritance was the choice he put in my hands, the choice to right a wrong, the choice to build something real instead of taking something easy. The scars of my childhood, the years of feeling alone, they're still there. They always will be. But they don't define me anymore. This place does. The work my hands do every day does. The community we are building here does. I found my home, not in a building, but in a purpose. Thank you for walking this path with me. If this story, or any part of it, resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, I'd be honored if you'd share your thoughts in the comments. This channel is a community for people who understand that the most valuable things in life are the ones we have to fight for. If stories like this matter to you, please subscribe and become a part of our community. Your story matters too, and you never know what you might find at the bottom of your own well.